welcome. You're with us here on Budget Brainstorm. I'm Aabha Bakaya and I'm coming to you today from the Hyderabad campus of ISB, one of India's leading institutes, with three of their professors from the Faculty of Finance. We've got Professor Apoorva Javedekar, Professor Prachi Deuskar, and Professor Prasanna Tantri. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Prasanna, let me start off with you and get an overall sense of how you felt the budget was this time around. It was widely applauded as an optimistic budget, a budget skewed for growth, and clearly one that was ready to spend to make sure they deliver on growth as well. Did you see it in the same light?
Yeah, so I share that overall optimism about the budget. So the reason, number one reason why people saying it's pro-growth is the investment in capex. As you see, that's gone up from 7.5 lakh crore to 10 lakh crores. Plus, there is a 3,70,000 crore loans given to states, which is linked to capex spending. So that way, it is, of course, it's going to spur government-led investment. I have some other opinion on what it's going to do overall. We'll come back to it in a while.
No, I'd love to know this. Can you elaborate?
So I share a slightly, while I applaud the efforts during a crisis. Now the fact that we have to consider a slightly coming out of crisis also. So eventually, if this government-led investment, if it translates into private investment, that's where the real growth is going to come from. So that we have to see. That's a little bit of skepticism that I have. Suppose private investment is not picking up because of other reasons, then this alone may not be sufficient. That's the only, otherwise it's all good. One last point is, great thing about this finance minister's budgets, they are super transparent. I teach her budgeting in my class, that this is how budgeting should be. She says a number and she does it. So that's another really good, although I have some worries, but on transparency, it's like 10 out of 10.
Okay, amazing. No, that's very reassuring to hear, because I think after a series of budgets, the last 2-3 years, the finance minister has really started to, tighten the speech, of course, and also the delivery in terms of targeting numbers and clear definitions of where the money is going. Do you feel perhaps that, when taking from what Prasanna said as well, with the allocation of capex, do you think it's going to crowd out perhaps the private sector somewhat, the fact that they're pushing so hard on investments on that front?
So that's a natural question that comes because the allocation for capex has gone up. But it depends a little bit upon how the banking is doing at that point in time. 2-3 years back, banking sector was in a little bit of a trouble. But if you look at the bank's balance sheets now, they are all reducing their non-performing assets, and they are having strong balance sheets ready to lend. So if banking sector is in a good shape, I believe that public spending or the government capex did not necessarily crowd out the private investments. To the extent private companies want to borrow and invest, I think our banking system has capacity right now to lend to them.
So the question, perhaps the bigger question is, will they stay on course on implementing some of their plans? And I must ask, and I know this is not related to the budget directly, but given that it was on budget day, the fiasco around Adani, do you think there's any real threat to the banking system at this point? Is it too early to tell?
No threat to the banking system or the economy or the financial markets as a whole. We have come a long way in deepening of our financial markets, and the exposure of the banking system also to this group is not high at all. So I don't think that is the markets panicked, but they have recovered, and so I don't think there's a real concern about a broader consequences. But
in fact, I see a positive in this, in the sense, retail investors, for instance. One of the things what is driving Indian market is retail investors, which is good. But then they are chasing stocks which have gone up 100 times earnings, 200 times earnings. It's like if the earnings remain same, it will take 200 years to recover. Of course, with growth, it will be less, but how much more, right? So this is some lesson for some people that, you can't keep betting on stocks that they'll, some people may learn lessons and it could be healthy also.
While, of course, it's critical for them to stay on track on the deficit target, where do you feel they're actually going to get this spending power from? I mean, coming back to, they haven't mentioned disinvestment targets. Is it coming back to tax receipts? Is it something else in the fine print that we've missed out on?
I think the budget is transparent in terms of the revenues. The tax revenues are likely to grow at 10-11%. with 11 lakh crores, I'm guessing around of net market borrowing, that covers 16 lakh 17 lakh crores of the fiscal deficit. So in terms of numbers, I think there is no ambiguity. Is it a big number of market borrowing?
Yeah.
So it is true that whether capex actually leads to a growth boost, that one will have to see. But I think to the extent they had to reverse some of the welfare schemes, they have done it, especially even after the coming year is the election year, they have done it. So I think to that extent they have been bold in this budget.
Just one point adding, and yes, I agree that the capex spending will increase productivity only in the long term, but the crowding out part also comes from overall government borrowing, and to the extent the budget has stayed with fiscal prudence and managed to at least have a targeted fiscal deficit that is along the glide path. I think the worries about crowding out private investment are tempered because of that prudence.
So what would you have liked to see?
Sure. So first, to answer on the tax number point of view. So again, as I said, transparency is something is really good in this budget. For this finance minister, see her track record. 2 years ago, she said she budgeted a tax receipts of 22 lakh crore, ended up doing 27 lakh crore.
Sure. So you're saying there's no worry on that.
Yeah.
front.
So she's done, they're budgeting a 10% increase on revised estimates. But I think actual numbers will be more than what their revised estimates. So I don't worry about the tax collection this year. But on the crowding out part, actually, maybe I was not clear in what I said. Even the 12.5 lakh crore that government is going to borrow from the markets this year is the money that would have been available for somebody else. In a crisis period, that somebody else would not have borrowed and all that. But now we can't claim on this one hand that banking sector is willing to lend, situation is doing better, and at the same time say that government needs to come and spend.
Sure.
So then both are, somehow I don't, these two are not adding up in my view.
So do you feel enough corporates have actually availed some of the liquidity in the system, or that a lot more could have happened, let's say, if there was more room to do so?
They have availed.
Yeah.
But investment in the private sector, is function of two things, right? First, how much it's available how much capital is available, but also uncertainty. Corporates don't like to make investments during times of uncertainty. And that is perhaps a bigger concern, like global uncertainty, because of war and higher inflation, that may kind of rein in investments by the corporates. So they have availed, they have borrowed money, but it remains to be seen if their appetite will pick up.
Okay.
I think, and maybe it is slightly similar to what Prasanna is saying, is that if private capex or private investment does not get crowded out, one reason could be that some of the corporates may not do a lot of capex as we are expecting in the short term. And so should government have cut down on capex this year? I'm of the opinion that entire private sector is not firing their capex guns at this point in time yet. So government had to step in for one more year. I think by next year, the crowding out question would be far more relevant because interest rates would be higher. And if you look at banks' credit to deposit ratio, that has also gone up to 75% now, roughly from 65%. That means banks will have little bit less surplus to lend to next set of borrowers. So when we see a broad pickup in private capex, which is a bigger worry, which is not happening as of yet, then government should take this caution measure of cutting back on some of their capex. But at this stage, I don't see that happening. So one more year.
No, it's good we're talking about this because you obviously have a lot of research that you're going by, because this is a constant debate that we have, and it's happening between the regulators, India Inc., industry forums. Is it the private sector that's not actually implementing their plans? Is it the banks that are sitting on surplus? It's constantly going back and forth. And she said multiple times, she said the onus is on India Inc. now to kind of drive that capex. And with the uncertainty, you're absolutely right. We don't know. We don't know whether we're going to see some of those plans unfold. But the other big headline that was clear in the budget this time was on the taxation front. And you touched upon that, Prasanna, in terms of their aim to drive consumption and also provide relief. Touch populist in that respect when it comes to the direct taxes. What was your take on it?
So I wouldn't call it populist, though it did have that
Flavor.
yes. And, given elections are coming up, if that is the only populist thing that happened in the budget, then it's not too bad.
I agree.
But overall, the move is towards kind of simplification and, sort of the reduction of the highest marginal tax rate is kind of, in line with many of the other countries in the world, except perhaps Europe. And so in that sense, it's a move in the right direction. And there's kind of tax relief at all income levels through different channels. But the key thing is sort of simplification. And even though government has sacrificed, about 35,000 crores of revenue because of this income tax slab and surcharge changes, broadly, particularly over the last 2-3 years, the effort has been to broaden the tax base.
Sure.
And they have done this through administrative steps, better information exchange across departments and so on. So I think that is the way to go for long-term income tax revenue growth, expanding the base and simplification of the regime. So I think that goes in the right direction.
Okay. What did you also think of some of their measures in education, health?
Yeah. So here I think there's a great opportunity that is missed. Okay. And capital expenditure, we talked about it a lot, right? So the increase has been 33%. Yeah. Health and education, roughly around 13% increase. And that too relative to the actual revised estimates for the last year, which have been lower than last year's budget, right? If you look at actual expenditure over 3 years ago compared to this year's budget, education has had about 10% annual growth rate, which is not a lot, and health even less, only 3% annual growth rate, right? And if we want to get that demographic dividend, we talk about a lot, investment in human capital is critical. Okay?
But she did talk a lot about skilling, for instance.
Yes. Yeah? So there are some very good specific steps. Okay. So skilling is one of them. Hiring of teachers and teachers training for primary government schools, that is a great step. Right? But even after this increase, the spending on education is about 3% of GDP. Right? And to achieve objectives of the new education policy, it needs to be at around 6%. Right? So significant ramp up is necessary in coming years if we want to deliver on those objectives. So some very good individual steps, but overall, this has not been the priority of this budget.
Right. So do you feel it was wise perhaps to forego a little bit of that in order to drive capex? I feel like she can't win either way.
Yeah.
She talked about the Saptarishi and trying to fulfill 7 goals, but it's tough, I think, to meet all expectations. Yeah.
So I agree with Prachi that it's health and education that matters more, that matter more than others. But one thing, when we look at accounting way, we should also not ignore the fact something like a Jal Jeevan Mission. For me, it's health.
Yeah.
Something like Swachh Bharat. Yeah. Although it doesn't come under health expenditure, it's doubled. Jal Jeevan is now 70,000 crores. It has direct implications on health. So they're doing those kind of stuff. But I agree. I would rather like to see such schemes than so as Apoorva said, maybe this one increase was fine. But my worry is the diagnosis of why private sector capacity utilization is not happening is wrong. It is not that there are not enough roads or there's no demand. India, if there is no demand, there is nowhere there is demand. There must be bottlenecks. You need reforms to, that's one topic that we have not touched upon. One of the reasons why private sector may not be investing is there are other bottlenecks. Sure. Maybe compliance is hard. Banking was one bottleneck which is getting resolved. So I think government has to, my big worry is the diagnosis of why private sector is not investing is wrong. So keep building roads and railways is not going to solve that problem. It's only going to increase demand, and in a falling savings scenario, it will only lead to increased prices eventually. So you have to solve those problems. Why these projects are stuck? Why is this private sector not investing? There needs to be debate, and I frankly I don't have an answer as of now. So, but we have to think about it.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, what do you think it is?
No, I think some of them are regulations, right? Some of them are tight regulations.
But this government prides itself on the fact that it does come out with a whole slew of reforms, tinkering, tweaks through the year. It does talk a lot about the ease of doing business, trying to simplify things online and so on and so forth. Create more easier access through approvals or the number of approvals. They talk about it at least in terms of the extent of improvement on ground. I'm sure that's still debatable.
Yeah.
But do you feel it's perhaps a combination of some of these things essentially?
Yeah, before Apoorva comes in, one point on contract enforcement, for instance.
Sure.
There's no, government cannot do much here,
Yeah.
and this fight between government and judiciary is only going to make it worse. So number of judges and contract enforcement is even when we went to 63, that ease of doing business is now stopped, as you know, because of the China issue. We were like 150, 116 contract enforcement. So without contract enforcement, you won't get investment.
I have been reading and seems to be also correct when we talk to some of the corporates is that land acquisition is another big hurdle. And so even if the capex plans have been announced, most of these will be done through EPC, private-public partnerships. But private players may get credit from banks and may be able to raise money, but to acquire land and to get all these, the contract rolling is itself a difficult issue. So that's why the number of bids you get is also less, even in terms of roads and railways.
One more adding to
this is all really important. I think it needs to be addressed because these are the real issues that everyone's facing.
So Prasanna talked about falling savings rate, and so essentially where is the capital going to come from? And one source of the capital can be foreign capital, either via portfolio investment or direct investment. But to attract that and keep them here, this ease of doing business and contract enforcement are critical, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is this kind of tussle between like government or the regulators and the court. It creates an added layer of uncertainty. Okay, this is the rule, but will it be enforced that way? Will the court interpret it in a different way, right? And this added uncertainty with bottlenecks then adds to this reluctance to take a plunge. So there have been some great improvements, but I think a lot more needs to be done on these fronts.
This is important too, because I don't think she really touched upon, or nothing came out of the budget that alluded to opening things up or inviting more investment in, which is going to be critical to drive manufacturing.
There was one announcement where the FM spoke about removal of so many thousand laws and so decriminalization of so many provisions. These are good things. The only thing is we have to see whether these were, what we call as binding constraints. There must be some arcane law which is never ever implemented. If you remove it, it adds to numbers, but it won't have any kind of impact on the ground. So some people have to sort of study what is the law. It's not the number. It could be just one law which is creating all the problems. So that's why I'm saying there needs to be deeper thought. My worry is if you talk to anybody, government economists and people within the government also, because things have worked, they did a great job in COVID. I must appreciate. Ours is one of the few countries which gave food rather than throwing money. But that victory sort of seems to have kept to a wrong lesson that's the way to go. Just increase consumption, increase government capex, and things will fall in line. Without these difficult things, one difficult thing, as Apoorva said, they rolled back subsidies. In an election year, it's a great thing. So without these difficult things, we are not going to go to 8-9%. We will do 6-7%, fair enough. For those 8-10%, we this land and these things need to be addressed.
Yeah, just one point I wanted. So in terms of what Prachi said, attracting foreign capital, actually, what worries foreign private investors is little bit of uncertainty in terms of the regulatory landscape here in India, right? And one of the announcements that was done in the budget is that foreign investors buying stocks or shares in unlisted companies at premium valuation would attract tax. Now that's going to deter a lot of foreign investment. There is little bit of back and forth between industry and finance secretary regarding which are these companies and do startups get covered in this. But I think startups do get covered, and so small changes like these create a lot of uncertainty for foreign investors, and they then become reluctant to come back to your country. So we have to trade with little bit of caution when it comes to tweaking these laws here and there.
Absolutely. There was some criticism, of course, from opposition parties in terms of, there should be more relief. This is going to be inflationary. So it's a double-edged sword because she's trying to drive consumption, of course, but on the other hand, we are heading in for a larger inflationary environment. India, in the context of what's happening currently in the globe, how do you see that playing out? Do you feel we're relatively insulated? We've just seen the Fed again hike. We are in for another quarter basis point, of course, as is expected. What do you feel is going to be the tone in the first half of the year?
So I think we cannot be, no big economy can be insulated from what is happening globally, right? And so there are 2-3 ways in which global uncertainty will play out. And for us, one of the biggest thing is how the oil prices do, right? And so if the oil prices are at like low level and don't spike up again, then we are on that front we'll be in a good shape, right? But increase in interest rate globally, then that reduces attractiveness of India as a destination for investors, and that may lead to kind of shortage of capital if there is investment appetite, right?
That's to worry that I fly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are not insulated, but given the vibrancy of the domestic part of the economy, I think we have some cushion.
Okay.
And that I think will.
So, we started the conversation, Prasanna sounded really gung-ho about the budget. And by the end of the conversation, I'm really worrying that it's down to a 3 on 10 for him.
No. We are not cheerleaders or mindless critics. We analyze as academics from a distance. And we're thinking of long term.
Yes.
Given the circumstances, as I said, if you have to score, I think I will score 8 or 8.5, which is very high.
Okay.
But I'm just pointing out that there are things which media or discussions, people had to discuss the next day, might not have had the time to think through. That's what we are highlighting. Absolutely. It's not that it's a great, reducing the tax from 43 to 39 and reducing subsidy in this election year is unheard of. That itself should get another 1 point more.
Thing.
And we are trying to live up to the title of the show, Brainstorm. So,
so we don't want to be just cheerleaders.
In terms of, you asked about the economy, I think interest rates across Europe, US going up, India has to increase the interest rates, otherwise, and we are not yet back to the normal inflation levels. That could take away a little bit of momentum from the housing sector right now. That we see housing sector picking off in US and Europe both right now. So India, the demand is very strong right now, but that could be one of the headwinds to look for when we start increasing the interest rates beyond this level. So that is just one.
But having said that, we should commodity prices are already softening. It's unless there is another episode of Russia-Ukraine, something really bad happening. The Fed is also, last increase was 25 basis points. From 75, they have come to 25. I think this cycle may stop. If that stops, I think things should be okay.
All right. So on that note, with an 8.5 on 10, we'll close this edition of Budget Brainstorm. And we look forward to being in conversation with all of you here at ISB more frequently on some of these key financial and economic issues. Thanks so much for watching.